This is my Canon P, and these are my first impressions of the camera after owning it for 2 months and putting 8 rolls of film through it. So I quickly want to talk about the rolls of film that I actually shot through this camera. Looking at my notebook right here, I had 1 roll of XP2, 1 roll of HP5 that I pushed to 800, 3 rolls of Fuji 400, 2 rolls of Kodak Vision 3 500T, and 1 roll of Vision 3 250D. First thing about this camera that I actually want to talk about are the cons. There really aren't that many. There's only 2, and one of them is subjective. The first thing that I want to mention is the close focus of the camera, and that's 1 meter. That might not sound like that big of a deal, but other cameras that are rangefinders, say a Leica or a Voigtlander Bessa body, allow you to focus to 0.7 meters, which, how big of a difference is that, 0.7 to 1 meter? But that's almost a foot. So using, an M body like that, or an M-mount film camera like those that I just mentioned, it allows you to focus almost a foot closer than this one. The next con that I want to talk about is the Viewfinder Magnification, and it's 1x. And I've heard people talk about like the advantage of this means you can have both eyes open when focusing the camera. But to me, I don't really see the appeal or why that's really that important. And the reason why I would consider this a con for myself is because I use a 35mm lens. That's like my one lens go-to focal length. And that's one thing I'll mention about the camera. The Viewfinder has frame lengths for 35, 50, and 100. However, because the Viewfinder Magnification is 1x, you really can't see the 35mm frame lens when looking through it. And the only real way to get a full sense of what your composition is going to be is by like kind of looking up, looking down, and then looking side to side to see your full frame lines. The reason I say that this is like just a subjective con is because if you're shooting with a 50mm lens, you're perfect. But with the 35, you just can't see the edges of the frame lines. But to me, that's never really been a big issue. I'm sure as you can see in the sample photos, the composition on most of them are just fine. But whenever I'm taking a portrait of someone, I just line the top of the 100mm frame lens right at their eye level. And to me, I've always gotten good compositions from that. And the other thing too is whenever I compose with this camera, I'm really not even looking or trying to look at the 35mm frame lens. I'm pretty much basing my entire composition off of how the 100mm looks and the 50mm looks, and just kind of taking an educated guess about what the 35mm focal length would give me. And that really wraps up my cons about the camera. I really don't have pretty much any issues with it. I feel like the 2 that I mentioned are pretty subjective. But the thing I do want to mention, the biggest con that I have with this setup is not with the camera, and it's with the lens. This is the Jupiter 12. This is a 35mm f2.8 lens, and it's just bad. As you can see from all the sample photos that I'm showing you, the lens flares so much, and I'll zoom into the corners of some of these images, but you can see the corners just like absolutely fall apart. They lose sharpness, they lose all detail. There's like a lot of smearing that happens. They also like vignette in a really weird way. I found that the edges of the frames kind of push this weird like purple or magenta. The center of the frame is good. It's sharp, wide open, and I found that at most apertures, the corners just look terrible. And again, the lens flares even whenever I wouldn't expect it to flare. Like there could be no direct light coming into the lens, hitting it, and it will still flare for some reason. So with that being said, I would highly suggest that you don't spend your money on this lens. I just bought it because it was super cheap, and I didn't want to spend a bunch of money in this system before I actually knew I liked it. Now that I do like it, I'll probably pick up the Voigtlander 35mm f2.5 PC lens, I think is what it's called. But honestly, I kind of feel like anything would be better than this lens. I don't want to be too negative on it, but it is really not great. Now, with all that being said, I want to talk about the pros of the camera. Looking at my notebook, the first thing that I want to talk about is that it's a rangefinder. This is not my first rangefinder camera. Before this, I've owned a film Leica M body, which is the Leica M5, and then a digital M body, which was the Leica M240. I sold both of those, and I really miss it. I really miss my M240, honestly, so much. But right now, I don't have a couple grand to drop on a digital or a film M body, and this to me felt like the next best choice. I personally love shooting rangefinders whenever it comes to like a daily camera, a camera that I could just have on me at all times because they're small and they're compact, and I really enjoy focusing with a rangefinder compared to, say, focusing with an SLR. This is my Nikon F3, and it's not like a big camera. It's not huge or anything. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen. This comparison is probably pretty jank. But the F3 isn't like a huge camera necessarily, but the Canon P is significantly smaller, and it also is significantly lighter, so it allows me to carry around with me pretty much daily and not really notice it. I just keep this in the bag that I take to work. And honestly, the last like real pro that comes to mind is just that it's a fun camera to use. And this is subjective, but like I mentioned earlier, I love shooting with rangefinder, so having this camera with me pretty much at all times has been a really fun camera to have. I've also brought it on photo shoots that I'm doing, and it's fun to have almost like a camera that's not as serious as the other ones that I'm shooting. I feel like having photos that feel less posed or more candid, feel more natural, they can bring a sense of realism and like authenticity to photos. The next thing that I want to talk about is how it's improved my photography. And the first one being, since I have it with me pretty much everywhere I go, I've been taking more pictures. And the reason why that to me is special is it's allowed me to just capture moments that I wouldn't have captured before. And one could argue that you could just take pictures on your phone, but having an actual camera feels much more intentional to me, you know? And it makes me want to actually take pictures. You know, like phones are great for snapshots and stuff, but I feel like having an actual camera is great for documenting the things that you want to document. And for me, that's really just like everyday life, just the things that I'm doing, the people that I'm seeing. And so that is point number one of how it's improved my photography, and that's just by taking more pictures. And the second one is much more technical than the first one. It's not about documenting memories or anything. It's about how I've been shooting the camera. And one thing I mentioned with the pros is that it's fully mechanical, and that means there is no light meter, unlike this camera. And so what that means is I've been shooting Sunny 16 for pretty much the entirety of owning this camera and through the 8 rolls that I've put through. I would probably say there's only a couple photos that you've seen that I metered with a handheld meter. And besides that, the rest of them have been shot using Sunny 16. And honestly, I'm kind of impressed with myself. I don't want to like toot my own horn or anything, but before this camera, I'd never shot Sunny 16. I've just kind of studied and looked at, you know, the charts and the things that people would recommend, and I've watched some videos about shooting Sunny 16. And, you know, I feel like almost every single one of the exposures is good. Like I exposed them properly without a meter, just kind of by making an educated guess based off of the available light and the quality of light, whether that's a harsh light straight from the sun, or if that's sort of diffused light by the clouds, or even inside. And I think a lot of the reason why the Sunny 16 images are turning out well is because in my mind I always err on the side of giving the film a little bit more light than I think it might need. A lot of the rolls, I guess the majority of the rolls that I've shot in this are Fuji 400, and so I kind of just like mentally rate the film at 250, so my my shutter speed is at 1/250th of a second, and I can just adjust my exposure from there. And after shooting 8 rolls of film through this camera over the last 2 months, and again the majority of them being with Sunny 16, going into the future, I've thought about other film cameras that interest me, and I really have no interest in getting another camera that, one, doesn't have built-in aperture priority or some sort of auto settings, but aperture priority is the best auto setting, or a fully mechanical camera that has no meter. And that's because, call me lazy, but honestly, when I'm using this camera, as you can see, the mode that it's in right now is in A. It's in aperture priority. I just feel like in the past, when I've had film cameras that have built-in meters that don't have any sort of automatic settings, I would spend too much time metering. I would put my eye to the viewfinder and I would, look around the scene and try to get the perfect exposure. But when trying to get that perfect exposure and then, take your eye off, change the settings, put it back on, try to compose, and then take a picture, I feel like, it caused me to miss a lot of things that I wanted to take a picture of, especially if it's of, say a fleeting moment. It's like whenever I'm using this camera, if I'm walking out of my house and it's a bright sunny day, I'll set the settings on my camera. So as soon as we go out and I see something I want to take a picture of, I can just quickly advance the film, focus, take a picture. There's no film in here, so I didn't waste a shot. And that has helped me for sure being able to get pictures of the things that I want to take pictures of. And that just kind of preemptively setting my exposure. So when I get to the areas that I think I'm going to be in and the lighting conditions that I think will be present in those settings, I can just quickly focus and take a picture and not have to miss something that I might have wanted to capture. And that's why I think this camera has helped to improve the photos that I can take, and that's because I take more photos and I'm more technically savvy with how to properly expose without the use of a light meter. But with all that being said, I'm going to start giving my overall thoughts. I think it's an absolutely amazing camera. I purchased mine for $270, but you can find them for anywhere from $180 to $250 very, very easily. The reason why mine was a little bit more expensive is because it had just gone over a CLA to the camera itself and the viewfinder, and I just wanted a good copy of the camera. This thing was and still is in fantastic condition. But since I have been using it a lot, there is some small wear and tear on it, but the camera is still in absolutely amazing condition. And if you are someone who is interested in getting into a rangefinder camera, but doesn't have well over $1,000 to $2,000 to spend on, say, something like a Voigtlander Besa or a Leica M-body, I would highly recommend considering the Canon P or other rangefinders made by Canon or Nikon. There are plenty of rangefinders that exist that are not just Leicas or just Voigtlanders, that can be had for a relatively affordable price. The only thing I wouldn't recommend, though, is the lens. I've been posting more consistently. I have a schedule that I'm going to be a lot more consistent with, and I'm holding myself to it. I have to post on the days that I have a video planned out. It's basically every week and a half. And yeah, it's kind of crazy how my channel is growing because I'm posting more consistently. It's crazy how consistency works like that. Now I'm going to actually end the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, I do really appreciate you. If you liked the video, please consider leaving a like or subscribing to the channel and checking out some of my other videos. I think I have some fun ones on the channel. Thank you guys again, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.